So, what is cultural Marxism? Well, in order to define that, I have to talk about classical Marxism. So, we know classical Marxism comes from Karl Marx, right? Classical Marxism is economic. It's with the end goal to bring in socialism and communism and totally eradicate and wipe out capitalism. That's what Karl Marx wanted. Karl Marx uh, was was an atheist who hated the church, hated Christianity, hated Christ. He said that he wanted to dethrone God and end capitalism. And he wanted to bring in socialism and communism. He said that socialism is the intermediate state between capitalism and communism. It's the road to communism. The end goal of socialism is always communism. And Marx predicted that there would be a revolution um, to bring in socialism and communism and eradicate capitalism once and for all. And, there was a small one. There was a little small revolution, but nowhere else in the world they weren't following up, right? Marx's goal and prediction was the total eradication of capitalism among the nations, and it never happened. That totally flopped. Now the question is, why didn't it happen? Well, the reason why it didn't happen, according to cultural Marxists, so here's where cultural Marxism enters, right? Because they're answering the question, why didn't this revolution happen? Why is capitalism still a thing? Because, fill in the blank. Well, here's the answer. Antonio Gramsci, an Italian philosopher, an Italian Marxist, taught the concept of cultural hegemony. All right, cultural hegemony, the hegemonic power in a culture. The hegemony, I think it's hegemony, cultural hegemony. Yeah, I think I was pronouncing that wrong. But what he taught is that cultures oppress people via ideology, right? And Antonio Gramsci also taught that in order to overthrow the culture and capitalism and bring in that revolution that Marx wanted, you have to weaken the culture. You have to destroy the culture. And so this is where the concept of cultural hegemony comes from. And give me one second. I want to make sure that I'm actually pronouncing this right. Cultural hegemony. Yeah, hegemony. I got it. Okay. But yeah, this concept of cultural hegemony by Antonio Gramsci again is the idea that cultures oppress people via the people at the top, right? The people that run things. Um, Oppress people via ideology, and he taught we need to overthrow the hegemony, take that over, weaken the culture and destroy it so that we can bring in this revolution that Karl Marx wanted. So, what is the hegemony in American culture, right? Um, White, Christian, able-bodied, heterosexual, cisgendered, native-born American males who look good. Um, right? Right, that's what it is in our culture. That's the quote unquote cultural hegemony according to cultural Marxism is that um, the people who fit that category are the oppressors. If any of that describes you, you are an oppressor based on that alone. And anyone who isn't that is being oppressed by you. Anyone who is in the hegemonic description is privileged, and whoever isn't is a victim, and they're at war with each other. This comes from Marx's conflict theory, and this is also where you get critical theory, critical race theory. Enter the Frankfurt School as well, right? The Frankfurt School is a school or collection of scholars that were in Frankfurt, Germany, right? They taught critical theory, right? Critical theory that comes in, critical race theory, it comes from that. And that was born at Harvard Law School. And Kimberly Crenshaw gives us intersectionality, I think, in 1989. Intersectionality, that all of these things have to do with the quote unquote uh, cultural hegemony, right? If you're white and you're a Christian and you're able-bodied, you're a male, you're heterosexual, you're not cisgendered, you're a native-born United States American, right? Then you're oppressing everybody else. The more of those descriptions that you check off for yourself, the more oppressive you are to others. And the less you are of those things, the more oppressed you are. So if you're all those things, but you're a woman, then you're a little bit oppressed. If you're a lesbian woman, you're more oppressed, right? If you're a black lesbian woman, you're even more oppressed than that. And the most oppressed is someone who is all those things and also identifies as trans. Well, then you're the most oppressed. This comes from Marx's conflict theory, right? When it has to do with economic classes. The whole oppressed paradigm where in classical Marxism, the more money you have, the more oppressive you are to others, right? The less money you have, the more oppressed you are by others. Everything was economics. Everything was seen that way according to Karl Marx. Cultural Marxism takes that same idea and just applies it to everything, not just economics. All of culture, everything you can think of. And the cultural Marxists, the Frankfurt School in Germany, they come over to the United States, New York, Columbia University, start teaching these things in the 1900s. And eventually you have critical theory. You have that being brought over in the concept of cultural hegemony, Marxist conflict theory, and critical race theory being born at Harvard Law School. And Kimberly Crenshaw later coming up with the idea of intersectionality. All of this is cultural Marxism. All of it. It all is. Right? And, so some ideas that we get from cultural Marxism, this concept of having to overthrow the cultural hegemony, this idea of the cultural hegemony being oppressive, and this idea of, critical theory, this oppressor conflict between classes and quote unquote races and, sexual orientation, all those things. All of this affects, life right now. What concepts do we have going on in our culture all over in the news that are a result of these culturally Marxist teachings? White privilege, right? Blacks are being hunted down in the streets, systemic racism in the police force. Those are things that comes from cultural Marxism. That's coming from critical theory. That's coming from critical race theory, right? And again, critical race theory, the idea that whites are oppressing black people just because they're white and black people are black, right? Critical theory, if you're in that cultural hegemony, you're oppressive. And if you're not in that, then you're being oppressed by them. And it's nonsense. It's nonsense. And it's not biblical. This is not a Christian worldview. This is not the gospel, right? I would go as far as to say this is an issue of whether or not you're in heretical error or not. We can't believe in Marxism. So, just some history about cultural Marxism. The Marxists' strategy changed. It's no longer economic revolution by force to overthrow capitalism. It's influencing the culture, right? taking over politics, churches, judges, schools, you know, because they want professors, pastors, politicians, and judges to be on their side because that influences culture. Those are the quote unquote robes of society, as Antonio Gramsci put it, and as Vodi Bakum explains in his lectures on this. Totally take over society, totally turn society upside down. And again, Antonio Gramsci, the Frankfurt School, Cultural Marxism, the reason that capitalism has not been overthrown all over the world is because you have to destroy the culture first. And a lot of these things that are happening in our culture right now in the United States, but even in other places in the world, like Europe, that's the goal. That's why these kinds of things are being talked about. And it's really dangerous. It is really dangerous. Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Economically, classically, and culturally Marxist movement. Black Lives Matter, the founders, I mean, there are three founders. Patrisse Cullors even said, yeah, we, the founders, are trained Marxists. Right? And on their website, before they took it down in their what we believe section, they literally had a doctrinal section. On their website you can find things about them being pro-abortion and wanting reparations, but I mean, they they were all about socialism and ending the nuclear family. I mean, they were in the cultural war, but they are on the bad side, the side against Christianity. They want culture because that's what Marxists are doing. This is what Marxists do. They want to take everything over, right? They hate capitalism, and it's funny how, you know, from the mouth of Patrisse Cullors, you go to their What We Believe section, you go to their website, you go to their statements, their beliefs, and the things that they advocate for, and solutions to problems ends up being economically Marxist, culturally Marxist, and wanting to get rid of capitalism. So, very scary, dangerous stuff.